One of the values that comes from Uber was be an owner, not a renter. And the concept here was really instilling in the entire team a sense of ownership in the long-term well-being and outcomes of the company. A renter might be optimized for short-term gains, really focused on their own outcomes, not caring about the neighborhood, the HOA, the gardening, the long-term upkeep and maintenance of a neighborhood and a block. Owners are. And what that meant was hire people and instill a culture where people are invested in the long-term outcome and future of the company instead of optimizing for short-term gains that might be personally motivated or specific to their position or role.
We are talking today about acting in the best interest of a company, what that means, where it came from, and there's a lot of insight or a lot of examples where this can come into play. And so the goal is to talk about how this relates to levels and how we might think through some of the things as they pertain to our team moving forward.
That's right. There's a few different pieces to it, and I think it's just a good principle that spans across our employee policies and what it's like to run the company, but also into the business side. When you're making decisions from a business standpoint, it's helpful to have some heuristic that guides you in the right direction and helps you think through the trade-offs of every decision. And so the intent there is just to have some sort of policy that everyone knows we can lean on, that spans all of our policies and process and just kind of gives people a backbone. So this is the one that we've landed on, which sounds straightforward and basic, but it does come into play in practice quite often. The question is, there's little details and intricacies and areas around the edges where it might not be clear. So our hope is to kind of chat through some of those and give some definition where there might be some subjectivity or just kind of questions around how it can be applied.
Yeah, so this idea of acting in the best interest of a company came from the playbook of Netflix. And so some of the examples are around like, what is acting in the best interest? Like, what does that mean? Because to your point, it is subjective. It's hard to put goalposts around like exactly what that is. It is a person's interpretation or we'll call it a group's interpretation of like, what does that mean? Maybe some examples, right? So being conscious of the way that you spend time or money on behalf of a company. Ways of going through it is like, will this improve the quality of your work? I.e., a better microphone. If a microphone's going to help improve the quality of your output, go for it. Will it improve your experience? Will it make you have a better work experience, like a better desk chair? Yes. Will you be more productive? Yes. That's a very easy thing of thinking through. Cool. I'm going to spend money on this thing within reason. Now, you get into these nuances of how good of a microphone, how good of a desk chair. Again, use your best judgment. And is it in the best interest of the people you work with, of the company, to get a $10,000 desk chair? Probably not. To spend $500? Probably. Yeah. It's going to make you have a better experience. So those are some loose examples, but maybe a starting point for thinking through it.
Yeah, this is the category that I would kind of label as what's in your best interest is in the company's best interest. And so if there are things that you need to do within your own work, tools you need, environment you need to set up, money you need to spend to make yourself more productive within reason, then that's in the interest of the company, because as a team, we want everyone to, be at their full output, be in a good state of mind, be well rested, be well resourced, all these kinds of things.
Well, one of the ones that I think gets overlooked, I've seen it from a video editing standpoint. Let's say somebody is trying to edit videos on this old MacBook Air and it's barely keeping up. What do you do? And so somebody won't want to spend the money to get a proper iMac. Mathematically, there is a ton of value in spending $20,000, which isn't absurd. That's a realistic price to spend on a desktop iMac that's meant for rendering videos that have a ton of storage required. And so people say like, oh, I can't spend the money. It's like, you're actually putting out less work. You're less productive. You're less good at your job by not wanting to spend the money because you think it's not in the best interest of the company. It's like, actually, it's the opposite. What is not in the best interest of the company is to be so frugal that you're like, no, I'm just staying on this. It's like, raise the flag, whether you are a dev or whether you're working in content, whatever it is, get the tools that you need, because like a contractor isn't using a little Leatherman to cut the studs. No, get a proper skill saw and make it happen.
Yeah, this is the trade. This is the function. Be great at it. I think there's kind of a double-edged sword here. On the one hand, there's a desire to feel like an owner, to act in the best interest of the company by being frugal and by being really intentional with these kinds of purchases. If you're taking it as if, acting like an owner, this is in your personal interest, you probably wouldn't necessarily spend that money in the same way if it wasn't if it were your own resources. But when it comes to the company dollars, we have one chance to get this right. And so that goes two ways. One, we don't want to burn money and spend irresponsibly such that we run out of runway or kind of use up all of our resources before we have time to execute all the way. At the same time, we want to make sure we get it right early and not waste time kind of going down the wrong path or not being well resourced and adding a ton of frustration along the way.
Another example is the idea of purchasing an expensive bottle of wine at a company dinner. I think objectively, people would agree that spending $500 on a bottle of wine, there's probably not a good reason to like get the expensive bottle of wine. It's not going to do anything to help the company move forward. And so that's like another example where you get into the slippery slope of subjectivity. And I think the discretion is, if it feels a little off, you're probably better to default to not doing it than doing it.
Yeah. And wine is tricky because, wine, pricing, costs, it's a whole world. The other example I'd give here is like if there's a team dinner and it costs a few $1,000s for 10 people to get together and, it's X dollars per head. It's okay to just spend that. Like get the team together, go to a fun place. You don't necessarily have to go to like the most insane restaurant, but we also don't necessarily want you eating at a fast food joint and trying to find a table somewhere. So like
Mhm.
reserve the private dining, whatever you got to do. And it's
Mhm.
okay to spend a little, given that our meetups are so infrequent. And when this happens, it's okay to arrange that for a team.
Another example, and again, we could get into tons of different examples with this, but another would be, we talked about the what's acting in the best interest. Well, purchasing things that's going to make your work environment feel comfortable, right? And so there again, it's gray area and nuance. Does an office chair make you feel more comfortable and more productive? Does a better desk area? Does another display, another computer display? We can rationalize this all day. But what is not in the best interest of the company is like, my guitars make me feel really good in my work environment here. But does that mean that like I should be able to rationalize that it is acting in the best interest of the company?
That's a good example of kind of drawing a line and say, this is probably not in this area. But if you're talking about a better chair or a different desk or something that makes you work better and can kind of be a reasonable expense that we can transfer to other people as well, that kind of passes the general test here.
Yeah, maybe a good way of looking at it is, if you heard that somebody else did something, would you think it was okay? And then you can just think about that for yourself. So if I heard like, hey, Miz just bought a whole bunch of mini diecast Ferraris for like his wall in his shelf because it made his work environment feel better, would I think that was reasonable? And if it's like, if you go, I don't think so, then it's sort of like, yeah, you should probably like use that for yourself. Apply that
Yeah.
lens to yourself. So we've talked about capital allocation, right? Investing hard dollars in things that you have to use discretion around. Well, the same heuristic can be used for time. Like time is a currency and you are investing, especially as a fully remote company. And now many companies are remote or have some aspect of remote work that they do, acting in the best interest. Well, it's pretty easy to say that sitting around for 5 days in the week and reading magazines and not doing any work is probably not in the best interest of the company. But going for a workout in the middle of the day, being autonomous, sure, that's in the best interest of the company. Absolutely. You're taking care of your health and wellness.
Yeah. The key here is just being reasonable. I think we all have a pretty good sense of acting maturely and having a good sense of judgment. We screen for that, we hire for that, we embed that into the culture. And so, your example of midday workout, if that's what you need to do to stay well and that's when you perform best, by all means, go for it. We're not measuring butts and seats, we're measuring collaboration, we're measuring output and work product. And that's what matters. The best example that I've heard of this is one that Tom mentioned early on. He was referencing a previous company, and the value as it's come out into the handbook or into the policy is don't take the red eye. And the story that he tells, he can probably tell it better than I can, was that he was traveling for work with his old boss or whatever it was, and they were doing a transcon US flight. And they had a presentation the next morning. And so they took the red eye. And on the one hand, that was saving the company time because the employee was sleeping while they were flying. On the flip side, they showed up, they were exhausted, they presented poorly, didn't sleep well, kind of felt sick. It's possible that that flight was cheaper economically, but it wasn't cheaper for the company because they didn't perform at their max.
Mhm.
And so the principle here is like think smartly about how you're using time and money. This doesn't mean to save $200 you have to stretch your body to the limits and not sleep, unless of course that's fine for you and it doesn't affect you too deeply. Then do what you want, but don't necessarily make a rule of taking the red eye because it's in the best interest of the company's time.
Mhm. Mark Randolph. So, Mark Randolph, co-founder of Netflix, for anybody who might not be aware, he was on one of the big like news networks and they had asked him about Netflix stock and what they're doing. And he said, "I can't comment on that, but what I can comment on is Netflix culture."
Because that Netflix culture springs from how Reed and I treated each other, how we treated our employees. It's always been about pushing responsibility down lower in the organization and empowering people to make decisions.
It's the exact same thing as act in the best interest of the company, but that is what makes people feel deeply connected to making these decisions. And maybe it's something that they have hired for, and it's something that, as you mentioned, that we bring people on who have high integrity and who understand that these are the values that we hold as a company.
Yeah, the question is you have a group of people. What kind of guidance can you give them to keep everyone on the right track and get to the right place without having the playbook? We don't know what those answers are going to be. We don't know what those questions are even going to be, but we want to give everyone some sort of guidance on how to make those and move forward as a group of people. And so long as we hire and screen and build culture around using judgment and making sure that people have some sense of good judgment and awareness and context, they can then make those decisions and run the business forward without us having to kind of forecast every single decision along the way. That's going to slow us down. We don't know what those questions are going to be. And to have to make those calls each and every time is just a load of bureaucracy. Having this principle frees us up, frees everyone up to feel a sense of ownership, to be trusted to be smart individuals and to make the calls they need to move something forward. And it's as simple as that.